The sound of shattering glass froze the entire trading post as Willow Barker's hand flew to her mouth, her blue eyes wide with horror at the mess of broken jars at her feet. It was 1878 in Montrose, Colorado, and making a scene was the last thing any respectable woman wanted, especially one who had just arrived in town less than a week ago. "Clumsy woman," a gruff voice muttered from somewhere behind her. Willow knelt quickly, her calico dress pooling around her as she tried to gather the larger shards of what had been jars of preserved peaches. The sticky syrup spread across the wooden floorboards, seeping into the cracks and attracting immediate attention in the otherwise quiet establishment. "Let me help you with that, miss," the shopkeeper said, moving around the counter with a rag in hand. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Hoffman. My hands are still shaky from the journey," Willow apologized, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. At 23, Willow had traveled alone from Boston following her parents' passing, answering an advertisement to work as a schoolteacher in the growing frontier town. The journey west had been long and arduous, leaving her nerves frayed and her confidence shaken. "Don't worry yourself," Mr. Hoffman said kindly. "Happens all the time." As Willow gathered the remaining pieces of glass, she became aware of several shadows falling across her. Looking up, she found herself surrounded by 5 men, none of whom had the appearance of gentlemen interested in helping a lady in distress. "Well, looky here," said the tallest of them, a man with a scar running down his cheek. "New blood in town and mighty pretty at that." The circle tightened around her, and Willow instinctively drew back, her spine pressing against the counter behind her. "Pardon me, gentlemen, but I need to finish cleaning up my mess," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We can help you with more than that, schoolmarm," another man said, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey despite the early hour. "Town needs more women like you, and we need to make you feel welcome proper-like." The 5 men closed in, their intentions clear in their leering smiles and the way they blocked her path to the door. Mr. Hoffman had disappeared into the back room, leaving Willow alone with her tormentors. "I believe the lady is occupied," came a deep voice from behind the wall of men. The group parted slightly, revealing a tall man in a well-worn duster, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the confident ease of someone accustomed to dangerous situations, positioning himself between Willow and the group of men. "Move along," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "This ain't your business, Quinn," the scarred man spat. "I'm making it my business, Harker," the cowboy replied evenly. "Miss, are you all right?" Willow nodded, unable to find her voice as she watched the silent confrontation unfold. "She was just being friendly," another of the men protested. "Didn't look friendly from where I'm standing," the cowboy said. "Move along, all of you." There was a tense moment when Willow thought the situation might erupt into violence, but something in the cowboy's stance, or perhaps his reputation, made the men reconsider. With muttered curses and dark looks, they began to disperse. "This ain't over, Quinn," Harker threatened as he backed away. "Never thought it was," the cowboy replied calmly. When they had all left the store, Willow released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you, sir," she said, finally getting a good look at her defender. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with intelligent gray eyes and a face weathered by sun and wind. His expression was serious but not unkind as he tipped his hat to her. "Xavier Quinn, miss, and you'd be the new schoolteacher." "Willow Barker," she confirmed, accepting his outstretched hand. His grip was firm but gentle, the calluses on his palm testifying to a life of hard work. "How did you know I'm the teacher? Small town," Xavier said with a slight smile that transformed his solemn features. Word travels fast in Montrose. Those men are trouble, Miss Barker, part of Harker's gang. They work for the Silver Creek Mining Company when they're not causing problems. I'll be sure to avoid them in the future, Willow said, grateful when Mr. Hoffman returned with a mop and bucket. Quinn, the shopkeeper acknowledged with evident relief. Good timing as always. Just happened to be passing by, Xavier said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Well, I'm grateful for your intervention, Mr. Quinn, Willow said, standing a bit straighter and trying to regain her composure. Just Quinn is fine, he corrected gently. Everyone calls me that. Very well, Quinn, she said, testing the name. I should finish my shopping and get back to the schoolhouse. There's much to prepare before classes begin on Monday. Xavier nodded, seemingly hesitant to leave. Would you allow me to escort you back when you're finished? Harker and his boys might still be lurking about. Willow considered his offer. In Boston, she would never have accepted such a proposition from a man she'd just met, but Boston rules didn't seem to apply here in the rugged Colorado frontier. And there was something trustworthy about Xavier Quinn, despite his intimidating presence. That would be most kind, she finally said. Thank you. While Willow completed her purchases, Xavier remained nearby, occasionally exchanging greetings with other customers but keeping a watchful eye on the door. She found his protective presence both reassuring and unsettling. She hadn't come west looking for a guardian, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach whenever he glanced her way. When they stepped out into the bright Colorado sunshine, Willow was momentarily blinded. Xavier placed a steadying hand at her elbow as her eyes adjusted. The schoolhouse is on Pine Street, correct? He asked. Yes, the small white building next to the church, Willow confirmed, conscious of his hand on her arm even after he'd withdrawn it. As they walked through town, Willow was aware of curious glances from townsfolk. Xavier seemed oblivious to the attention or perhaps simply accustomed to it. Have you lived in Montrose long? She asked, trying to make polite conversation. 5 years, he replied. Came here after the war. The army, cavalry. Not something I care to discuss much, he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. I understand, Willow said quickly. I'm still learning what topics are considered appropriate in Montrose. In Boston, conversation was an art form with strict rules. Xavier's expression softened. Out here, people are more concerned with what you can do than how properly you can discuss the weather. You'll find your footing soon enough. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Willow gathered the courage to ask, Those men at the store, will they be a problem for me? Xavier's jaw tightened. Harker holds grudges, but he's a coward at heart. Still, it would be wise not to venture out alone for a while, especially after dark. That's rather limiting, Willow protested. I can't have an escort everywhere I go. Just until Harker finds some other distraction, Xavier assured her. Or until you learn to use this. To Willow's shock, Xavier reached into his coat and produced a small Derringer pistol. Mr. Quinn. I could never. Every woman out here should know how to protect herself, he interrupted firmly, returning the pistol to its hiding place. I could teach you. Nothing improper about it. Willow was speechless. The idea of handling a firearm was completely foreign to her upbringing. I'll consider it, she said finally, though she had no intention of doing so. They reached the schoolhouse, a modest building with fresh white paint that stood in contrast to the weathered structures around it. The town council had clearly made an effort to create an impressive educational establishment. This is where we part ways, Miss Barker, Xavier said, tipping his hat once more. If you need anything, I have a small ranch about 3 miles north of town. Anyone can direct you there. Thank you again for your assistance today, Willow said, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Just doing what any decent man would," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Decent men had been in short supply at the trading post earlier. As Xavier turned to go, Willow called out impulsively, "Mr. Quinn, I'm hosting a small gathering for parents this Sunday afternoon after church. To introduce myself before school begins. Perhaps you would consider attending." Xavier paused, seeming surprised by the invitation. "I don't have children, Miss Barker." "No, but you have been kind to their new teacher," she replied. "And I would appreciate having at least one friendly face in attendance." A smile ghosted across his features. "I'll consider it," he said, using her own words from earlier. As she watched him walk away, Willow couldn't help but wonder what had brought such a man to Montrose and what kept him here. There was a story there, she was certain, and despite her better judgment, she found herself wanting to know it. The Sunday gathering arrived more quickly than Willow anticipated. Her days filled with preparing the schoolhouse, reviewing curriculum, and meeting townspeople who stopped by to satisfy their curiosity about the new teacher from the East. By the time the church service ended and people began making their way to the schoolhouse, Willow's nerves were on edge. She'd arranged a modest spread of refreshments on a table at the back of the room and placed chairs in a semicircle for the parents. Families began arriving, introducing themselves and their children with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Willow noted that most of the mothers seemed genuinely pleased to have a proper teacher for their children, while many of the fathers remained skeptical of her abilities. Miss Barker, Mrs. Coleman, the minister's wife, said warmly, "You've done wonders with the place in just a week." Willow smiled, gesturing to the newly hung maps and the freshly painted blackboard. "Thank you. I want the children to feel inspired to learn." "A noble sentiment," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Willow turned to see Xavier Quinn standing just inside the entrance, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the school setting but impeccably groomed. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean shirt under a black vest. The transformation from rugged rancher to respectable citizen was striking. "Mr. Quinn," Willow said, unable to hide her surprise and pleasure. "I'm glad you could join us." Several parents exchanged glances, and Willow heard whispers that confirmed her suspicion that Xavier Quinn was not a regular participant in town social functions. "I brought these," Xavier said, presenting her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For the school." Willow unwrapped it to find several books, a collection of Shakespeare, a geography text newer than the outdated one already on her shelf, and a beautifully illustrated book of natural history. "These are wonderful," she exclaimed genuinely. "The children will benefit greatly from them. Thank you." Xavier nodded, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's nothing. Had them collecting dust." The gathering proceeded with Willow outlining her plans for the school term and answering parents' questions. Throughout it all, Xavier remained at the back of the room, observing quietly but attentively. Occasionally, Willow would glance his way and find his eyes already on her, causing a warmth to spread through her chest. As the event wound down and families began to leave, Willow noticed Harker and two of his men from the trading post incident lingering across the street, watching the schoolhouse. Their presence cast a shadow over the otherwise successful afternoon. Xavier noticed them too. "I'll see Miss Barker safely home," he announced to Mrs. Coleman, who had stayed to help clean up. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Quinn," the minister's wife said with a knowing smile that made Willow blush. When the last of the parents had departed, Xavier helped Willow gather her belongings. "You didn't have to come today," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied simply. "You've made quite an impression on the town already." "For better or worse," Willow sighed, nodding toward the window where Harker and his companions could still be seen loitering. "Don't let them trouble you," Xavier said firmly. "They're just trying to intimidate you." "Why, what have I done to them?" Xavier's expression darkened. "Nothing. But you represent change education, things men like Harker fear because they don't understand them." They left the schoolhouse together, Xavier deliberately positioning himself between Willow and the men across the street. Harker spat in their direction but made no move to approach. "Where are you staying?" Xavier asked as they walked. "Mrs. Thornton's boarding house," Willow replied. "It's quite comfortable, though I hope to find more permanent accommodations eventually." "The old Miller place might be available for rent soon," Xavier suggested. "It's small but would give you privacy." "I'll inquire about it," Willow said, touched by his thoughtfulness. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the late afternoon sun painting the mountains to the west in vibrant shades of gold and crimson. Montrose was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way that was so different from Boston's manicured parks and orderly streets. "May I ask you something, Quinn?" Willow ventured as they approached the boarding house. "You can ask." "I might not answer," he replied with a hint of amusement. "Fair enough," she conceded with a smile. "I was wondering why you decided to settle here in Montrose. You don't seem like the typical homesteader." Xavier was quiet for so long that Willow thought he'd chosen not to answer. Finally, he said, "After the war, I couldn't go back east. Too many ghosts. I drifted west, worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army. Ended up here during a harsh winter and stayed when the pass was snowed in. By spring, I'd found a piece of land that spoke to me, seemed as good a place as any to stop running." The simple honesty of his answer touched Willow deeply. "Thank you for telling me that." They had reached the boarding house steps, and Xavier removed his hat as they stopped. "I should thank you, Miss Barker," he said, "for inviting me today. It's been some time since I've been included in town affairs." "Perhaps that's because you don't allow yourself to be," Willow suggested gently. Xavier's eyes met hers, surprise evident in their gray depths. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Good evening, Miss Barker." "Good evening, Quinn," she replied, watching as he placed his hat back on his head and walked away. As Willow prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking about Xavier Quinn far more than was proper for a woman who had known a man for only a few days. There was something about him that called to her, a combination of strength and solitude, that awakened both her compassion and her curiosity. Little did she know that across town, Xavier was similarly troubled by thoughts of a blue-eyed schoolteacher with the courage to travel alone across a continent, and the determination to bring education to a frontier town. The first week of school passed in a blur of activity as Willow adjusted to teaching children of various ages and abilities in a single classroom. Some had never attended school before, while others had received sporadic instruction from previous teachers who rarely stayed more than a season. By Friday afternoon, Willow was exhausted but exhilarated. The children were eager to learn, for the most part, and she had already established firm but fair routines that kept the classroom orderly. As she dismissed the students for the weekend, 10-year-old Tommy Prescott lingered behind, shuffling his feet nervously. "Is something wrong, Tommy?" Willow asked, concerned by the boy's unusual hesitation. "No, madam," he said, "but my pa wanted me to give you this." He thrust a folded piece of paper into her hands before dashing out the door. Puzzled, Willow unfolded the note to find a message written in a surprisingly elegant hand. "Miss Barker, I would consider it an honor if you would join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. I have business in town and thought you might appreciate a meal you didn't have to share with a dozen other boarding house residents. Respectfully, X. Quinn." Willow read the note twice, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. A proper dinner invitation from Xavier Quinn was unexpected. She hadn't seen him since the Sunday gathering, though she'd thought of him often. The invitation presented a dilemma. Accepting would certainly set tongues wagging in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Yet refusing would mean missing an opportunity to know Xavier better, something she found herself wanting with surprising intensity. After a moment's consideration, Willow took out a sheet of paper and penned a brief reply. "Mr. Quinn, I would be delighted to accept your kind invitation. I shall meet you at the hotel at the appointed time. Sincerely, Willow Barker." She sealed the note and walked to the Prescott farm on the edge of town, where she found Tommy helping his father with the horses. "Tommy, would you be kind enough to deliver my reply to Mr. Quinn?" she asked, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite her flushed cheeks. "Yes, madam," the boy said eagerly, taking the note. "I'm going out to his ranch with Pa tomorrow to look at a colt." "Thank you," Willow said, nodding to Mr. Prescott, who gave her a knowing smile that only deepened her blush. The next evening found Willow standing before the small mirror in her boarding house room, critically examining her appearance. She had only brought 2 nice dresses from Boston, saving them for special occasions. Tonight, she chose the dark blue one that her mother had always said brought out her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her honey blonde hair into a simple but elegant style. She wasn't naive enough to believe this was merely a friendly dinner between new acquaintances. In Montrose, a single man inviting a single woman to dinner at the hotel had clear implications of courtship, or at least serious interest. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. Xavier Quinn was unlike any man she'd known in Boston direct, unpolished by society's expectations, yet possessed of a natural dignity and integrity that many Eastern gentlemen lacked beneath their veneer of politeness. At precisely 10 minutes to 7, Willow descended the stairs of the boarding house, ignoring the curious glances from other residents gathered in the sitting room. "Don't wait up, Mrs. Thornton," she said to her landlady with forced lightness. "I'm having dinner at the hotel." "With Mr. Quinn, I hear," the older woman replied with an arched eyebrow. "Be careful, my dear. He's a good man but carries more shadows than most." "I'll remember that," Willow promised, slipping out the door before further comments could be made. The hotel was only 2 blocks away, Montrose being a compact town despite its growing importance as a trading center. Willow walked briskly, aware of eyes watching from windows and porches. By tomorrow, everyone would know about her dinner with the reclusive rancher. Xavier was waiting in the hotel lobby, standing straight and tall in a dark suit that looked seldom worn but fit his broad shoulders perfectly. When he caught sight of her, something in his expression made Willow's breath catch a flash of admiration quickly controlled, but unmistakable. "Miss Barker," he said, bowing slightly. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she replied formally, aware of the hotel clerk watching with undisguised interest. "You're very kind to invite me." "The pleasure is mine," he said, offering his arm to escort her into the dining room. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Montrose, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented the frontier town's aspirations to civilization. White tablecloths covered the tables, and a small vase of wildflowers adorned each one. Oil lamps cast a warm glow over the room, which was perhaps half full with other diners. Conversation paused briefly as they entered, confirming Willow's suspicion that their dinner would be the subject of tomorrow's gossip. Xavier seemed either oblivious or indifferent to the attention as he led her to a table in the corner, somewhat removed from the others. "I hope you don't mind the location," he said as he held her chair. I prefer to have conversations without an audience. A difficult proposition in Montrose, Willow observed with a small smile. Impossible, Xavier agreed, taking his seat opposite her. But we can at least minimize the eavesdropping. The waiter approached, presenting them with the limited menu. Xavier ordered for both of them after consulting Willow's preferences. A practice she would have found presumptuous in Boston, but somehow didn't mind here. When they were alone again, Xavier seemed suddenly unsure of himself. As if having successfully arranged the dinner, he was now at a loss for how to proceed. "Have you been to your ranch recently?" Willow asked, trying to ease his apparent discomfort. "I understand the Prescotts were visiting you today." "Yes, John Prescott is interested in a colt I've bred," Xavier said, visibly relaxing at the safe topic. "His boy has a good hand with horses, shows real promise." "Tommy is quite bright," Willow agreed, "though his penmanship could use improvement." Xavier smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features. "Not everyone can have your elegant hand, Miss Barker." "You've seen my handwriting?" she asked, surprised. "Your note," he reminded her. "Your penmanship reveals your Eastern education." "As yours revealed something unexpected about you," she countered. "Your handwriting is remarkably refined for a rancher." A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "My mother insisted on proper education. Before the war changed everything." Willow sensed she'd touched on something painful and quickly changed the subject. "Tell me about your ranch. Tommy mentioned you raise horses." The tension eased as Xavier described his small but growing horse breeding operation. He had started with just 2 mares and a stallion, but now had a promising herd, specializing in animals suited to the demanding conditions of the Colorado frontier. "You speak of them with such pride," Willow observed as their food arrived. "Like a father discussing his children." "They're fine animals," Xavier said simply. "Honest in a way people rarely are." "You prefer horses to people, then?" Willow asked, cutting into her beefsteak. Xavier considered the question seriously. "Horses don't judge based on a man's past. They care about how you treat them in the present." "People." He trailed off, looking past her for a moment. "People remember." "What is it they remember about you that troubles you so?" Willow asked softly, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Xavier's gray eyes sharpened, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. "You're direct, Miss Barker," he finally said. "Forgive me if I've overstepped," she replied, though she wasn't truly sorry. "But you intrigue me, Quinn. You're clearly educated, yet you choose to live apart from society. You intervene to protect me from Harker's gang without hesitation, suggesting you're a man of principle, yet the town regards you with a mixture of respect and wariness." "You've been asking about me," he stated rather than asked. "Observing," she corrected. "It's an occupational habit for teachers." A faint smile touched his lips. "And what have your observations told you?" "That you're a man with secrets," she said honestly. "But not, I think, secrets that should make a lady afraid to dine with you." Xavier's expression softened. "No," he agreed quietly, "not those kinds of secrets." They ate in silence for a few moments before Xavier spoke again. "I fought for the Union, saw things no man should see, did things." He paused, his fork suspended above his plate. "After the war, I found it difficult to return to civilization. The noise, the crowds, the pretense that everything was normal when nothing would ever be normal again." Willow listened, her heart aching for the pain evident in his controlled voice. "I came west because out here a man is judged more by what he does than what he's done," Xavier continued. "My neighbors care that I breed good horses and pay my debts. They don't ask about Shiloh or Gettysburg. But they know there's something," Willow guessed. Xavier nodded. Small towns have long memories, even for things they don't know the details of. There was an incident when I first arrived. I wasn't always as controlled as I am now. The admission hung in the air between them, and Willow sensed it was as much as he was willing to share for now. "Thank you for telling me that much," she said gently. Xavier looked surprised, then grateful. "You're an unusual woman, Willow Barker." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Boston society would certainly agree with you," she said with a small laugh. "I was always too curious, too outspoken, too eager to form my own opinions rather than adopt those considered suitable for a lady." "Is that why you came west?" Xavier asked. "To escape society's constraints?" "Partly," Willow admitted. "After my parents died last year, there seemed little reason to stay. My father was a professor, and my mother supported his work by maintaining a perfect household and impeccable social connections. When they were gone, I realized I'd been living the life they wanted for me, not one I'd chosen." "So you chose Montrose," Xavier said with a hint of amusement. "I chose adventure," she corrected him. "Montrose happened to need a teacher at the right moment." "Lucky for Montrose," Xavier said quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Willow felt a connection forming between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, despite their different backgrounds. The rest of the dinner passed pleasantly, their conversation turning to lighter topics. Books they had both read, the progress of Willow's students, the changing seasons in the Colorado mountains. By the time they finished their apple pie, Willow felt as if she'd known Xavier Quinn for years rather than days. As they left the restaurant, Xavier once again offered his arm, which Willow accepted without hesitation. The streets of Montrose were quiet in the early evening darkness, with only a few establishments still lit up, primarily the saloons where piano music and rowdy laughter spilled out into the night. They walked slowly toward the boarding house, neither seemingly eager for the evening to end. "I've enjoyed tonight immensely," Willow said as they approached her temporary home. "Thank you for inviting me." "I've enjoyed it as well," Xavier replied. "More than I expected to." Willow laughed softly. "Is that a compliment or an admission of low expectations?" "A confession of how long it's been since I've had dinner with a beautiful, intelligent woman," Xavier said, his voice dropping to a deeper register that sent another shiver through Willow. They stopped at the bottom of the boarding house steps, and Xavier released her arm reluctantly. "Would you permit me to call on you again?" he asked formally. "I would like that very much," Willow replied, surprised by her own boldness but certain of her feelings. Xavier hesitated, then reached for her hand, raising it slowly to his lips. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, at odds with his frontier appearance, but somehow perfectly in character with the man she was coming to know. "Good night, Willow," he said softly. "Good night, Xavier," she responded, using his given name for the first time. As she watched him walk away into the darkness, Willow knew with absolute certainty that her life in Montrose had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more interesting. The following weeks established a pattern that quickly became the subject of town gossip. Xavier would ride into town every few days, ostensibly on ranch business, but inevitably finding time to visit the schoolhouse after classes ended. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a jar of honey from a neighbor's bees, a book he thought Willow might enjoy, once even a small potted plant for her desk. On Sundays after church, they would often walk together, sometimes joining other townspeople for community meals, other times finding a quiet spot by the river for private conversation. Xavier was gradually becoming more comfortable in social settings, though Willow noticed he still tensed when crowds became too boisterous, or when unexpected noises erupted nearby, lingering effects of his war experiences. She suspected. What began as curiosity between them deepened into genuine affection, and then something more powerful. Willow found herself watching the clock on days when Xavier was expected, and Xavier made increasingly flimsy excuses to visit town. Not everyone viewed their growing attachment favorably. Harker and his gang made their disapproval known through dark looks and muttered comments whenever they encountered Willow in town. Though they never directly confronted her again, their hostility was palpable. More surprisingly, some of the town's respectable citizens also expressed concern about the relationship, particularly to Willow. "He's a fine horseman. No one denies that," Mrs. Peterson told Willow after church one Sunday, her voice lowered to a confidential whisper. "But there are stories about his time before Montrose, violent stories." "Thank you for your concern," Willow replied diplomatically, "but I prefer to judge people by my own experience of them." The warning wasn't isolated. Mrs. Thornton, her landlady, had similar misgivings. "I've nothing against Mr. Quinn personally," she said one evening as Willow prepared for another dinner with Xavier. "He pays his bills and doesn't cause trouble these days, but there was a time, just after he arrived, when he was different. There was an incident at McCready's saloon." "I appreciate your concern," Willow interrupted gently. "But whatever happened in the past, Xavier is a good man now." "Men don't change their fundamental nature, my dear," Mrs. Thornton cautioned. "They may control it for a time, especially when there's a lady involved, but under pressure, they revert to who they truly are." Willow considered the older woman's words as she pinned her hair up. Was she being naive about Xavier? She'd seen hints of a carefully controlled temper, a darkness he kept tightly leashed. But she'd also witnessed his kindness, his intelligence, his integrity in everyday dealings. When Xavier arrived to escort her to dinner, Willow studied him with new eyes, looking for signs of the dangerous man others hinted at. All she saw was a man who removed his hat in her presence, who stood when she entered a room, who listened to her opinions with genuine interest, a man whose gray eyes softened when they met hers. "Is something wrong?" Xavier asked, noticing her scrutiny. "No," Willow decided. "Nothing at all." As October painted the surrounding hills with vibrant colors, Xavier invited Willow to visit his ranch for the first time. Propriety demanded a chaperone for such an excursion, so Mrs. Coleman, the minister's wife, agreed to accompany them. Xavier arrived early on Saturday morning with a light wagon, helping both women up to the seat with careful courtesy. Mrs. Coleman chatted amiably as they left town, asking Xavier about his latest foal and sharing news about church fundraising efforts. The road north of Montrose wound through increasingly rugged countryside, following the contours of the land rather than imposing straight lines upon it. After about 40 minutes, Xavier turned the wagon onto a less traveled track that led toward a tree-lined valley. "Almost there," he said, a note of pride entering his voice. Rounding a bend, the Quinn ranch came into view. It was modest compared to some of the larger cattle operations in the region, but meticulously maintained. The main house was a substantial log structure with a wide porch across the front. A large barn and several smaller outbuildings formed a neat cluster nearby, while corrals and paddocks extended beyond. In a meadow beyond the buildings, several horses grazed peacefully. "It's lovely," Willow said sincerely. "So peaceful." "This is what I fought for," Xavier said quietly, so only Willow could hear. "Not flags or states' rights or grand political ideas, just the right to build something of my own, something clean and honest." The simple declaration moved Willow deeply. She placed her hand briefly over his where it rested on the seat between them, a gesture hidden from Mrs. Coleman by the folds of Willow's skirt. A young man emerged from the barn as they approached, waving in greeting. "That's Ezra," Xavier explained. "He helps with the horses and keeps an eye on things when I'm in town." Ezra proved to be a friendly, freckle-faced young man of perhaps 19 or 20, clearly devoted to both Xavier and the horses in his care. "Everything's ready, Mr. Quinn," he reported as Xavier helped the ladies down from the wagon. "I've got Sunshine saddled for Miss Barker like you asked and old Daisy for Mrs. Coleman." "Saddled?" Willow asked, surprised. Xavier looked suddenly uncertain. "I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the ranch than we could cover on foot. But if you'd rather not ride, I'd love to," Willow assured him quickly. "It's been some time since I've been on horseback, but I did ride in Boston. I'm just surprised you remembered that I mentioned it." "I remember everything you tell me," Xavier said simply. Mrs. Coleman cleared her throat discreetly. "Perhaps I could see the garden while you young people ride. My old bones aren't what they used to be." "Of course," Xavier agreed, looking relieved. "Ezra can show you around the house and garden. The apple trees are bearing well this year." With that settled, Willow found herself being introduced to Sunshine, a gentle golden mare with intelligent eyes and a patient demeanor. "She's one of my best," Xavier said as he adjusted the stirrups to suit Willow's height. "Steady but spirited when asked." "Like her owner," Willow observed with a smile. Xavier's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I've been called many things, but steady isn't usually among them." He helped Willow mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Even through the layers of her riding habit, his touch sent warmth spreading through her. Once she was settled, Xavier swung easily onto his own mount, a powerful black gelding named Thunder. "They're a matched pair in their way," he explained as they set off at a walk. "Raised them from colts." They rode away from the buildings, following a well-worn path that led toward the hills. Willow quickly regained her confidence in the saddle, enjoying the rhythmic movement and the fresh mountain air. "How many acres do you have?" she asked as they rode side by side. 300, Xavier replied. "Small by some standards, but enough for my purposes. The creek provides water year-round and the valley has good protection from winter storms." As they crested a small rise, Xavier reined in his horse and Willow followed suit. Below them stretched a vista of remarkable beauty, the ranch buildings nestled in the valley, surrounded by golden aspens and dark pines, with the distant peaks of the San Juan Mountains providing a majestic backdrop. "This is my favorite spot on the property," Xavier said quietly. "When I first saw it, I knew this was where I belonged." "I can see why," Willow breathed, taking in the scene. "It's perfect." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, their horses occasionally nickering softly to each other. "Willow," Xavier began, his voice unusually hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you, about my past, before the rumors reach you in distorted form." Willow turned to look at him, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands gripped the reins more tightly than necessary. "You don't need to," she started. "I do," he interrupted firmly. "You should know who I am before things between us go any further." The implication that he was contemplating a future with her made Willow's heart beat faster, but she remained silent, giving him space to continue. "When I first came to Montrose, I was different," Xavier said, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "The war had changed me, hardened me in ways I didn't fully understand. I drank too much, trying to quiet the memories." He paused, and Willow waited patiently, sensing how difficult this confession was for him. "There was an incident at McCready's saloon," he continued. "A man accused me of cheating at cards. I wasn't, but the accusation, it triggered something. The next thing I knew, I'd nearly beaten him to death." Willow inhaled sharply, the image at odds with the controlled man she knew. He lived, Xavier added quickly, but it was close. Sheriff Morton could have jailed me, maybe should have, but instead he gave me a choice. Leave town for good or get control of myself. Said he recognized the signs from other veterans he'd known. Xavier finally turned to look at Willow directly. I decided to stay to prove I could be better than my worst moment. It wasn't easy, still isn't some days. The anger is always there, just below the surface. But you control it, Willow said softly. Most of the time, Xavier agreed, but you should know it exists. The man everyone warns you about. He's still part of me. Willow considered his words carefully. We all have darkness within us, Xavier. The measure of a person isn't the absence of such feelings, but what they choose to do with them. That's a generous perspective, he said, a hint of skepticism in his tone. It's the truth as I see it, Willow replied. Would I be right in thinking you haven't had a similar incident since then? Yes, Xavier confirmed, though Harker and his gang have certainly tested my restraint. Then I think your actions speak louder than the warnings of people who haven't bothered to know the man you are now, Willow said firmly. Xavier studied her face, searching for signs of doubt or fear. Finding none, he exhaled slowly. You continue to surprise me, Willow Barker. Good, she said with a smile. I'd hate to become predictable. They continued their ride, Xavier pointing out property boundaries and sharing plans for expanding the horse breeding operation. By the time they returned to the ranch house, their earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a deeper understanding and trust. Mrs. Coleman was waiting on the porch, enjoying a cup of tea with Ezra, who jumped up when he saw them approaching. Right on time, the young man called. Dinner's almost ready. Ezra cooks, Willow asked, surprised once again. Better than I do, Xavier confirmed as he dismounted and came to help her down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Willow found herself wishing Mrs. Coleman wasn't watching so attentively. The interior of Xavier's home reflected the man himself, straightforward, unpretentious, but with unexpected touches of refinement. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Bookshelves lined another, filled with well-worn volumes that spoke of regular use rather than mere display. Dinner proved to be simple but delicious: roast chicken, fresh vegetables from Xavier's garden, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with even Mrs. Coleman relaxing her chaperone vigilance enough to enjoy herself. As they prepared to return to town in the late afternoon, Willow found herself reluctant to leave. The ranch had shown her a different side of Xavier, the home he had created, the life he led when not in town, the peace he had found despite his troubled past. Thank you for today, she said as he helped her into the wagon, for sharing your home with me, and for trusting me with the truth. Xavier's hands tightened briefly on hers. Thank you for listening without judgment. The ride back to Montrose was quieter, all three passengers lost in their own thoughts. Mrs. Coleman dozed against Willow's shoulder, providing an unexpected privacy despite her presence. Will you be at church tomorrow? Willow asked softly. Xavier, who attended services irregularly at best, nodded. I'll be there. Good, Willow said, feeling a pleasant anticipation at the thought of seeing him again so soon. As they entered the outskirts of town, Xavier slowed the wagon. I've been meaning to ask, he said casually, though Willow sensed the question was important to him. The harvest dance is next Saturday. Would you do me the honor of attending with me? The harvest dance was one of Montrose's major social events, a celebration that brought in families from outlying farms and ranches. Attending as Xavier's partner would be a public declaration of their attachment. "I would be delighted," Willow said without hesitation. The smile that lit Xavier's face was worth whatever gossip their appearance at the dance might generate. What neither of them could have anticipated was how their growing relationship would catalyze events already set in motion by forces beyond their control, events that would test the strength of their newfound bond and reveal the true depth of Xavier Quinn's character, for better or worse. The week leading up to the harvest dance passed with agonizing slowness for Willow. Her days were filled with teaching, but her thoughts constantly drifted to Xavier and their deepening relationship. Each evening, she worked on refreshing her best dress for the dance, adding new ribbon trim and carefully mending a small tear in the lace collar. Word spread quickly about their planned attendance together, generating reactions that ranged from approval to concern to outright hostility. The latter came primarily from Harker's gang, who seemed to take Xavier's happiness as a personal affront. On Friday afternoon, as school was dismissing, Willow noticed Harker himself lounging against a tree across from the schoolhouse, watching as the children departed. His presence made her uneasy, but she was determined not to show fear. When the last child had gone, Willow locked the schoolhouse door and headed toward the boarding house, her arms full of papers to grade. She had only gone a short distance when Harker fell into step beside her. "Afternoon, Miss Barker," he said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Mr. Harker," Willow acknowledged stiffly, quickening her pace. "Heard you're attending the dance with Quinn tomorrow," Harker continued, easily matching her stride. "Doesn't seem fitting for a schoolteacher to associate with a man of his reputation." "I believe I'm capable of choosing my own associates," Willow replied, her voice cool. Harker stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You know what they call him, the Butcher of Macready's. Nearly killed a man with his bare hands. That the kind of company you want to keep." "Please step aside, Mr. Harker," Willow said firmly, though her heart was racing. "Just offering friendly advice," Harker said, his tone anything but friendly. "Quinn's got a darkness in him. Sooner or later it comes out. Wouldn't want a refined lady like yourself caught in the crossfire when it does." "Your concern is noted," Willow said, stepping around him. "Good day." Harker grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh through her sleeve. "I'm not finished." "Remove your hand, sir," Willow demanded, her voice steady despite her fear. "Or what?" Harker sneered. "Your attack dog isn't here to protect you now." "Is there a problem, Miss Barker?" came Sheriff Morton's voice from behind them. Harker released Willow's arm immediately, his expression shifting to one of casual innocence. "No problem, Sheriff. Just having a friendly chat with our esteemed teacher." Sheriff Morton, a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed little, looked to Willow for confirmation. "Mr. Harker was just leaving," she said pointedly. The sheriff nodded. "Best be on your way then, Harker. I'm sure you've got important business elsewhere." With a final glare at Willow, Harker sauntered away, his casual posture belied by the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff," Willow said when Harker was out of earshot. "Happy to help," Morton replied. "Though you might want to tell Quinn about this encounter. Harker's been stirring up trouble lately, more than usual." "I don't want to worry Xavier," Willow said, concerned that such information might provoke exactly the reaction Harker seemed to be trying to elicit. The sheriff studied her thoughtfully. "Quinn's worked hard to become the man he is now. Don't underestimate him by keeping things from him." "That's not trust." His words struck home and Willow nodded slowly. "You're right, I'll tell him tomorrow." "Good," Morton said. "Now let me walk you back to Mrs. Thornton's, just to be safe." The night of the harvest dance arrived clear and cool, with stars shining brilliantly in the mountain sky. The town hall had been transformed with autumn decorations, bundles of dried corn stalks, pumpkins and gourds, garlands of colored leaves harvested from the surrounding hillsides. Willow stood before the mirror in her room, smoothing the rich burgundy fabric of her dress and adjusting the cameo brooch at her throat, her mother's, and one of the few pieces of jewelry she'd brought west. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, with a few soft curls framing her face. A knock at the door announced Mrs. Thornton. "Your gentleman caller has arrived, my dear, and looking quite handsome, I must say." Willow smiled at the change in her landlady's attitude toward Xavier. Over the past weeks, his consistent courtesy had gradually won over even the most skeptical of Montrose's matrons. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Willow descended the stairs to find Xavier waiting in the small parlor. He wore a black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard for the occasion. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the admiration that blazed in his eyes made Willow's breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "As are you," she replied with a smile. "Handsome, I mean." Xavier offered his arm. "Shall we scandalize the town together?" "With pleasure," Willow agreed, placing her hand on his sleeve. They walked the short distance to the town hall, joining other couples and families heading in the same direction. Music already spilled from the open-doors fiddles, and a piano playing a lively reel. Inside, the hall was crowded but not uncomfortably so. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the scene. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while the center of the room had been cleared for dancing. Their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation before people returned to their activities, though Willow was aware of continued glances in their direction. "Ignore them," Xavier murmured near her ear. "They'll find something new to gossip about by next week." "I don't mind," Willow assured him. "I'm proud to be here with you." The simple declaration brought a rare, full smile to Xavier's face, transforming his normally serious expression. "May I have this dance?" he asked as the musicians began a waltz. "You dance?" Willow asked, surprised once again. "Poorly," Xavier admitted, "but with enthusiasm." He was being modest. As they joined the other couples on the floor, Xavier guided her confidently, his hand warm at the small of her back. They moved together as if they'd danced 100 times before, finding a natural rhythm that made Willow feel both safe and exhilarated. "Another hidden talent, Mr. Quinn," she teased as they circled the floor. "My mother insisted her sons learn to dance properly," Xavier explained. "Said no Quinn man would embarrass a lady on a dance floor if she had any say in it." "I'd like to have known your mother," Willow said. "She would have liked you," Xavier replied with certainty. "She valued courage and honesty above all else." They danced several more sets before taking a break for refreshments. Xavier fetched cups of punch while Willow chatted with Mrs. Coleman and some of her students' parents. "You and Mr. Quinn make a handsome couple," Mrs. Peterson commented, her earlier reservations apparently forgotten. "And I've never seen him so sociable." "He's making an effort," Willow acknowledged, glancing across the room to where Xavier was engaged in conversation with Sheriff Morton. "This isn't his natural environment. Love has a way of pushing us beyond our comfort, Mrs. Coleman said with a knowing smile. "It does a heart good to see it." Before Willow could respond to the implication that she and Xavier were in love, a conclusion she wasn't ready to voice aloud. Though her heart had already accepted it, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Harker and his gang had arrived, already half drunk and louder than propriety allowed. They swaggered into the hall as if daring anyone to object to their presence. Sheriff Morton immediately moved to intercept them, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Evening, gentlemen. Glad you could join us. I trust you'll remember this is a family gathering." "Wouldn't dream of causing trouble, Sheriff," Harker replied with exaggerated innocence. "Just here to enjoy the festivities like everyone else." Morton didn't look convinced, but with no actual infraction to address, he could only nod. "See that it stays that way." Xavier had appeared at Willow's side, his body tense though his expression remained neutral. "Perhaps we should step outside for some air," he suggested quietly. "We can't let them drive us away," Willow objected. "That's exactly what they want." Xavier studied her face, then nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but stay close." For the next hour they managed to enjoy themselves despite the undercurrent of tension. The music continued. People danced and ate and socialized. And Harker's gang confined themselves to drinking punch heavily spiked from flasks and making crude comments among themselves. Just when Willow thought the evening might pass without incident, Harker approached as she and Xavier took a break between dances. "Miss Barker," Harker said with an exaggerated bow, "might I have the honor of the next dance?" Willow felt Xavier stiffen beside her but kept her voice calm. "Thank you, Mr. Harker, but I'm afraid I'm spoken for this evening." "Just one dance," Harker persisted, alcohol making his words slightly slurred. "Seems only fair to share. Quinn here's been monopolizing you all night." "The lady declined," Xavier said quietly. "Move along, Harker." The phrase echoed their first meeting at the trading post, and Willow saw recognition and anger flash in Harker's eyes. "Always giving orders, aren't you, Quinn?" Harker said, his voice hardening. "Think you're better than the rest of us, but we know what you really are. A killer with a fancy manner." Xavier remained perfectly still, though Willow could feel the tension radiating from him. "This isn't the place, Harker. Walk away." Instead, Harker stepped closer, deliberately invading Xavier's space. "Or what? You'll beat me like you did Jackson at McCready's." "Show the school marm your true colors." The music had stopped, conversations dying away as people became aware of the confrontation. Sheriff Morton was moving toward them, but he was on the other side of the room. "Please, Mr. Harker," Willow intervened. "Let's not spoil the evening." Harker's bloodshot eyes flicked to her. "You deserve to know who you're keeping company with, Miss Barker. Ask him about Shiloh. Ask him about the prisoners." Xavier's face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight that Willow feared for his teeth. Whatever Harker was referring to had struck a deep nerve. "That's enough," Sheriff Morton said, finally reaching them. "Harker, you and your boys need to leave. Now." "Just having a friendly conversation, Sheriff," Harker said, not taking his eyes off Xavier. "Just making sure the lady knows all the facts before she gets in too deep." "I said leave," Morton repeated, his hand moving to his gun. For a tense moment, Willow thought Harker might refuse, might force a confrontation that could only end badly. Then he smiled, a nasty expression that held no humor. "We're going," he said, backing away. "But this isn't over, Quinn, not by a long shot." As Harker and his gang departed, muttering threats and obscenities, conversation slowly resumed. The musicians, after a nod from Morton, started playing again, though the carefree mood of earlier had dissipated. Xavier stood rigidly beside Willow, his breathing controlled but his eyes distant, as if seeing something far beyond the decorated hall. "Xavier," she said gently, touching his arm. "Let's go outside, please." He nodded wordlessly, allowing her to guide him through the crowd and out onto the small porch at the back of the building. The night air was cold now, and Willow shivered in her thin dress, but her concern for Xavier overrode physical discomfort. They stood in silence for several minutes, Xavier staring into the darkness, his hands gripping the porch railing with white-knuckled intensity. "What Harker said," he finally began, his voice barely audible. "About Shiloh, it's not. It wasn't how he made it sound." You don't have to explain, Willow said. I do, Xavier insisted, turning to face her. If you're to understand who I am, who I was, you need to know this. He took a deep breath, gathering himself. After the Battle of Shiloh, my unit was assigned to guard Confederate prisoners. We'd lost a lot of men, good friends. The fighting had been brutal. Something broke in me, in many of us. Xavier's voice was flat, emotionless, as if the only way he could tell the story was to distance himself from it. There was a group of prisoners, young like us, but in gray instead of blue. One of them taunted us about our dead, said they'd gotten what they deserved. He closed his eyes briefly. I lost control, beat him badly, might have killed him if others hadn't pulled me away. It wasn't combat, it wasn't self-defense. It was rage, pure and simple. Willow felt tears welling in her eyes, not for the nameless prisoner, but for the young soldier Xavier had been, traumatized by battle and pushed beyond his limits. I was disciplined, demoted, Xavier continued. But the army needed soldiers more than it needed moral examples. I stayed in, fought in more battles, became efficient at killing men I'd never met. When the war ended, I couldn't go home, couldn't face my family with what I'd become. He looked at her directly now, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight. So you see, Harker wasn't entirely wrong. There is darkness in me. I've worked for years to control it, to be better than my worst impulses. But it never truly leaves. Willow stepped closer to him, placing her hand on his chest where his heart beat strongly beneath layers of clothing. The fact that you fight it, that you recognize it and choose differently every day, that's what matters, Xavier. Not what happened during a war that drove many men to madness. You can't know that, Xavier said, but there was a desperate hope in his voice, a need to believe her words. I know you, Willow said firmly. I've seen your kindness to children, your fairness in business, your gentleness with creatures in your care. Those things reveal character far more truly than actions taken in the worst circumstances of your life. She moved her hand to his face, cupping his cheek in her palm. The man you are now is the one who matters to me, the one I've come to care for deeply. Xavier covered her hand with his own, turning his face slightly to press a kiss to her palm, a gesture of such vulnerability that Willow felt her heart might burst with tenderness. I don't deserve your faith, he whispered. You've earned it, she corrected him. Day by day, action by action. Xavier's free arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Willow, he said, her name a question and a plea. She answered by rising on tiptoe, bringing her face closer to his. Yes, she breathed. Their first kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, a meeting of lips that spoke of reverence rather than passion. When they parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. We should go back inside, Willow said reluctantly. People will talk. Let them, Xavier replied, but he released her nonetheless, offering his arm once more. Though you're right, I've monopolized enough of your time for one evening. They returned to the dance, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. The remaining hours passed in a pleasant blur for Willow, who danced not only with Xavier but with several other partners as protocol demanded, though her eyes constantly sought him across the room. As the evening drew to a close, Xavier escorted Willow back to the boarding house, both of them quiet, absorbed in their own thoughts about what had transpired, both the confrontation with Harker and the deeper connection they had formed in its aftermath. At the boarding house steps, Xavier took Willow's hands in his. Despite Harker's interruption, this has been one of the finest evenings of my life, he said softly. Mine as well, Willow agreed. May I call on you tomorrow after church? I would like that very much, she replied. Xavier raised her hands to his lips, kissing first one and then the other. Until tomorrow, then. As Willow watched him walk away, She knew with absolute certainty that she was falling in love with Xavier Quinn's shadows, complexities, and all. What she couldn't know was that Harker's animosity was about to escalate in ways that would put that love to its most severe test. Sunday dawned bright and clear. The mountains to the west, standing in sharp relief against the deep blue Colorado sky. Willow dressed carefully for church, choosing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her thoughts kept returning to the previous night, to Xavier's confession on the porch, to their kiss, to the feeling of rightness she'd experienced in his arms. After services, during which Xavier sat beside her in what was becoming his customary place, they declined invitations to Sunday dinner with various families in favor of a private walk. The day was unusually warm for late October, perfect for strolling along the riverbank at the edge of town. "I've been thinking," Xavier said as they walked, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that had become familiar to Willow. "About Harker. Willow had been expecting this. So have I. He seems determined to cause trouble between us." "It's not just that," Xavier replied, his brow furrowed. "His hatred seems personal, beyond the usual antagonism he shows toward most people. I've been trying to recall if I've had specific dealings with him that might have caused offense. Could it be related to his work for Silver Creek Mining?" Willow suggested. "Perhaps there was a business dispute." Xavier shook his head. "I've had no dealings with Silver Creek. Their operation is on the other side of the valley from my property." They walked in silence for a moment before Willow remembered her encounter with Harker outside the schoolhouse. "There's something I should tell you," she said, describing the incident and Sheriff Morton's advice. Xavier's expression darkened. "He threatened you. Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "For exactly this reason," Willow said, touching his arm to calm him. "I didn't want to provoke the very anger Harker seems determined to ignite in you." Xavier took a deep breath, visibly mastering his temper. "You're right. That's precisely what he wants." He covered her hand with his own. "But please don't keep such things from me in the future. I need to know when you're in danger." "I will," Willow promised. "Though I think danger is overstating it. Harker is unpleasant but dangerous," Xavier finished firmly. "Don't underestimate him, Willow. Men like that, when thwarted, can become unpredictable." They continued their walk, the conversation turning to more pleasant topics: Xavier's horses, Willow's students, books they both enjoyed. By unspoken agreement, they avoided discussing the deeper emotions that had surfaced the night before, as if both needed time to adjust to the changing nature of their relationship. As they returned to town, Xavier suddenly stiffened, his attention caught by something ahead. "Wait here," he said, his voice taking on a tone of command Willow hadn't heard before. Before she could object, Xavier strode quickly toward the livery stable, where a crowd had gathered. Drawing closer despite his instruction to stay put, Willow saw that Xavier's horse, the black gelding Thunder, was the center of attention. The animal was clearly distressed, prancing nervously while the livery owner tried to calm him. "What happened?" Xavier demanded, pushing through the onlookers. "Don't know for sure," the liveryman replied. "Found him like this when I came to feed the horses. Something spooked him bad." Xavier approached the horse, speaking softly and extending his hand palm up. Thunder calmed somewhat at his master's presence, but still showed signs of agitation. "There's blood on his flank," Xavier observed, his voice dangerously quiet. The liveryman nodded grimly. "Notice that. Looks like someone took a quirt to him. Not deep cuts, but mean-spirited." Xavier's face went blank, a mask that Willow recognized as concealing intense emotion rather than indicating its absence. "Who had access to the stable last night?" "That's the thing," the liveryman said, looking troubled. "Locked up myself after the dance. Door was still locked this morning." Whoever did this either had a key or came in through the loft window. Xavier examined Thunder more closely, checking for other injuries and murmuring reassurances to the agitated animal. When he turned back to face the crowd, his expression was controlled, but his eyes blazed with a cold fury that made several onlookers step back. "Harker," he said, the name a statement rather than a question. The livery man shrugged uncomfortably. "Can't say for sure. Didn't see nothing." "Quinn," Sheriff Morton's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "A word." Xavier hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Thunder, but finally nodded to the livery man. "Take care of him. I'll be back to get him shortly." He joined the sheriff at the edge of the crowd, where Willow stood watching with growing concern. The three moved away from the curious onlookers, finding a measure of privacy near the sheriff's office. "It was Harker," Xavier stated flatly, "or one of his men on his orders." "Likely," Morton agreed, "but without witnesses there's not much I can do officially." "Then I'll handle it unofficially," Xavier said, his voice dangerously soft. "That's exactly what he wants," the sheriff countered. "To provoke you into doing something that gives him justification for further violence or gives me no choice but to arrest you." "He hurt my horse to send a message," Xavier said, anger simmering just below the surface of his controlled tone. "I need to send one back." "Xavier," Willow interjected, placing her hand on his arm. "Sheriff Morton is right. This is a trap and you're walking right into it." Xavier looked down at her hand, then at her face, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "What would you have me do? Ignore it?" "Let him think he can act without consequences." "Of course not," Willow said, "but there must be a way to respond that doesn't play into his hands." Sheriff Morton nodded approvingly. "Listen to your lady, Quinn. She's got a good head on her shoulders." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "There might be another approach. Harker works for Silver Creek Mining, but he's not particularly valued by them. More trouble than he's worth, from what I hear." "What are you suggesting?" Xavier asked, his anger giving way to calculation. "A word in the right ear at Silver Creek might see Harker and his boys assigned to the most distant, least desirable mining camp in the company's holdings," Morton explained. "Or even let go entirely." Xavier considered this. That would remove him from Montrose without direct confrontation. "Exactly," the sheriff confirmed. "I can make the ride out to speak with Jameson, the mine manager, tomorrow. He and I go back a ways." "I'll go with you," Xavier decided. "Two voices are more persuasive than one." Morton hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. No accusations we can't prove. Just concerns about the company's reputation in town being damaged by their employees' behavior." "Agreed," Xavier said, some of the dangerous light fading from his eyes. Willow squeezed his arm gently. "A wiser course," she approved. Xavier covered her hand with his own. "I'm trying," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "It doesn't come naturally." "I know," she replied with equal softness. "That's what makes it matter." The rest of Sunday passed without further incident. Xavier retrieved Thunder from the livery stable, treating the shallow wounds on the horse's flank, and leading him gently back to the small paddock behind the sheriff's office where the animal could be kept under watchful eyes overnight. When Xavier escorted Willow back to the boarding house in the late afternoon, his manner was distracted, his thoughts clearly on the confrontation to come the next day. "Be careful tomorrow," Willow said as they stood on the boarding house porch. "Harker may have other plans we haven't anticipated." "Sheriff Morton and I can handle Harker," Xavier assured her, though his expression remained troubled. "It's you I'm concerned about. While I'm gone, stay in town. Don't go anywhere alone." "I have school to teach," Willow reminded him. "I can't hide indoors all day." "Ask Mr. Peterson or another father to escort you to and from the schoolhouse," Xavier insisted. Just for tomorrow, please, Willow." The genuine worry in his eyes melted her resistance. "All right, for tomorrow." Xavier relaxed slightly. "Thank you." He glanced around, confirming they were unobserved, before bending to place a brief, gentle kiss on her lips. "I'll return as quickly as possible." Willow watched him walk away, a sense of foreboding settling over her despite the rational approach they had agreed upon. Harker's vindictiveness seemed too personal, too targeted to be satisfied by a simple removal from town. She feared there was more to come, and she was right. Monday morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds obscuring the mountains and a chill wind sweeping down from the high country. Willow accepted Mr. Peterson's offer to escort her to the schoolhouse. Grateful for both the company and the sturdy umbrella, he held over them as a light rain began to fall. Her students were restless, affected by the gloomy weather and the tension that seemed to permeate the town. Rumors about the incident with Xavier's horse had spread, and several of the older children asked Willow directly if Mr. Quinn was going to have a gunfight with Mr. Harker. "Certainly not," Willow replied firmly. "Mr. Quinn and Sheriff Morton are handling the situation in a civilized manner. Now, let's return to our arithmetic." By midday, the rain had become a steady downpour, drumming on the schoolhouse roof and obscuring the view through the windows. Willow kept the children inside for their lunch break, organizing quiet games to burn off their excess energy. Just as she was preparing to resume lessons for the afternoon, the schoolhouse door burst open, admitting a gust of wind and rain along with Tommy Prescott, soaked to the skin and breathing hard. "Miss Barker," he gasped, "come quick. There's trouble at your boarding house." Willow's heart lurched. "What kind of trouble, Tommy?" "Fire," the boy exclaimed. "Mrs. Thornton's place is burning." For a moment, Willow stood frozen in shock. Then her teacher's instincts took over. "Children," she said, keeping her voice calm through sheer force of will, "school is dismissed early today due to an emergency. Older students, please make sure the younger ones get home safely. Stay together and go directly to your homes." As the children gathered their things amid excited chatter, Willow pulled on her rain cloak and turned to Tommy. "Did someone go for the volunteer fire brigade?" "Yes, madam," the boy confirmed. "My pa sent me to fetch you while he helped with the bucket line." Together they hurried through the rain-soaked streets toward the boarding house. Even from 2 blocks away, Willow could see smoke rising despite the downpour. As they drew closer, the scene became clear flames licked from the windows of the upper floor, and a line of townspeople passed buckets of water from the nearby well to those on ladders trying to douse the blaze. Mrs. Thornton stood in the street, clutching a few salvaged possessions, her face streaked with soot and tears. When she saw Willow, she hurried over. "Oh, Miss Barker, thank heaven you're safe. I was afraid you might have returned early because of the rain." "What happened?" Willow asked, watching in horror as the flames spread despite the efforts to contain them. "I don't know for certain," Mrs. Thornton replied, her voice trembling. "I was in the kitchen when I smelled smoke. By the time I got upstairs, the fire was already spreading from—" She hesitated, then continued reluctantly. "From your room, my dear." "My room," Willow repeated, stunned. Mrs. Thornton nodded grimly. "I'm sorry, but I fear your possessions." The implications hit Willow all at once. Her clothes, her books, her mother's jewelry, the letters from her parents she had preserved, all gone. And more troubling still, the fire had started in her room when she wasn't there. This was no accident. "Harker," she whispered, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "What's that, dear?" Mrs. Thornton asked, not catching the quiet word. Before Willow could respond, Sheriff Morton appeared, his face grim beneath his rain-soaked hat. "Miss Barker, glad to see you're all right." "Sheriff, this wasn't an accident," Willow said urgently. "The fire started in my room, and I believe it was deliberately set by Harker or one of his men." Morton's expression hardened. "That's my thinking as well. Mrs. Coleman saw a man fitting the description of one of Harker's gang lurking near the boarding house earlier today." "Where's Xavier?" Willow asked, suddenly desperate to know he was safe. "On his way to Silver Creek with me, last I saw him," Morton replied. "We separated when we got word about the fire. I came back to town while Quinn continued to the mining company to speak with Jameson as planned." A sick feeling settled in Willow's stomach. "Sheriff, I think Xavier might be riding into danger if Harker planned this fire to draw attention in town." Morton's eyes widened as he followed her reasoning. He could be planning something for Quinn on the isolated road to Silver Creek. He turned to a deputy who had just arrived. "Jenkins, get a fresh horse and ride after Quinn. Tell him to turn back immediately." The young deputy nodded and sprinted toward the livery stable. "I'm coming too," Willow declared, already moving to follow. "Miss Barker," Morton objected. "It's too dangerous, and in this weather, Sheriff," Willow interrupted, her voice steady despite her fear. "Xavier is in danger because of me, because Harker used me to get to him. I'm coming." Something in her expression must have convinced the sheriff of her determination. "Very well," he conceded, "but you'll ride with Jenkins and you'll follow his instructions without argument." "Agreed," Willow said instantly. Within minutes, she was mounted behind Deputy Jenkins on a sturdy bay horse, galloping through the rain toward the road leading to Silver Creek Mining Company's headquarters. The rain had turned the dirt road to mud, slowing their progress and raising fears that they might be too late. As they crested a rise about 3 miles from town, Jenkins suddenly reined in hard. "Look there," he said, pointing toward a stand of pines off to the right of the road. Through the curtain of rain, Willow could make out the shapes of horses tied among the trees, at least 4 of them. "Ambush," Jenkins muttered, drawing his pistol. "They're waiting for Quinn to come back this way." "We have to warn him," Willow said urgently. Jenkins hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to protect Willow and the need to help Xavier. "We'll circle around," he finally decided. "Try to intercept Quinn before he reaches this point." They left the road, pushing through brush and across rocky terrain in an attempt to cut across to the path Xavier would take returning from Silver Creek. The rain continued relentlessly, reducing visibility and making the footing treacherous for their horse. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably less than 30 minutes, they heard the sound of gunfire in the distance, a rapid series of shots followed by isolated reports. "Too late," Jenkins said grimly, spurring the horse toward the sound. They emerged from a copse of trees to find a scene of chaos on the road ahead. Xavier's black gelding Thunder stood riderless at the edge of the road. Nearby, 2 men lay motionless on the ground while gunfire continued to echo from behind a large boulder where flashes of muzzle fire indicated someone Xavier. Willow prayed was returning fire on attackers positioned in the trees across the road. "Stay back," Jenkins ordered, sliding from the saddle and drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Keep the horse. If things go bad, ride back to town for help." Before Willow could argue, the young deputy was moving forward in a crouch, using the minimal cover available to approach the boulder. Willow's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard over the rain and gunfire. She couldn't just sit and wait, not when Xavier's life was in danger. Slipping from the saddle, she tied the reins to a small tree and moved cautiously forward, staying low and using the same sparse cover Jenkins had utilized. As she drew closer to the boulder, she could hear voices, Jenkins identifying himself, and then Xavier's response, tense but alive. "Quinn." "It's Jenkins. Sheriff sent me." "Behind the rock," 3 men still in the trees across the road. Relief flooded Willow at the sound of Xavier's voice, followed immediately by renewed fear as more shots rang out, chipping fragments from the boulder. She reached the edge of the protective rock to find Xavier pressed against it, a bleeding wound visible on his left arm. Jenkins was beside him, peering carefully around the boulder before firing at their hidden attackers. "Willow!" Xavier exclaimed when he saw her, his expression a mixture of relief, anger, and fear. "What are you doing here? Get back. I couldn't wait in town," she said, crawling to his side and examining his wound. "You're hurt. Graze," he grunted. "I'll live. You shouldn't be here, Willow." "It's too dangerous." A bullet whined past, uncomfortably close, emphasizing his point. "Harker's men?" Jenkins asked, firing again toward the trees. Xavier nodded grimly. "Harker himself plus 3 others. I've accounted for 2 of them." He nodded toward the still forms on the road. "But we're pinned down here." "Sheriff will be coming with reinforcements," Jenkins assured him. "We just need to hold out." Xavier's jaw tightened. "We're exposed here if they work around behind us." He glanced at Willow, his concern evident. "There's cover in those rocks about 50 yards back," Jenkins suggested. "If we make a run for it, too open," Xavier cut him off. "They'd cut us down before we made it halfway." Willow's mind raced, searching for a solution. The situation was dire, but there had to be a way out. Then an idea struck her. "Your horse," she said suddenly. "Thunder, he's still at the edge of the road." Xavier looked at her sharply. "What are you thinking?" "A distraction," Willow explained quickly. "If I could reach him, mount up, and ride hard in the opposite direction, it might draw their fire long enough for you and Deputy Jenkins to change position." "Absolutely not," Xavier said immediately. "It's suicide." "She might be right," Jenkins said reluctantly. "A moving target is harder to hit, especially in this rain, and they might think it's reinforcements arriving." "I won't risk her life," Xavier insisted, his voice hard. "It's not your choice to make," Willow said firmly, "and I don't see another option." Xavier started to object again, but a fusillade of bullets striking around the boulder silenced him. Their situation was deteriorating rapidly. "There's a depression in the ground just behind us," Jenkins pointed out. "If you stay low, crawl to it, then make a dash to the horse when you're out of their direct line of sight." "No," Xavier repeated, but with less conviction. Willow touched his face gently. "I can do this, Xavier. I have to try." For a moment he simply looked at her, conflict raging in his eyes. Then, with visible reluctance, he nodded. "Stay as low as possible. When you reach Thunder, don't try to mount normally. Grab the saddle horn and swing up in motion. He's trained for it. And then ride like hell." "I will," Willow promised, removing her heavy rain cloak to allow for easier movement. "We'll provide covering fire," Jenkins added. "Draw their attention this way." Xavier caught Willow's hand before she could move. "Willow," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I love you, remember that." The declaration, made in such desperate circumstances, nearly broke her composure. "I love you too," she replied, the words she'd held back now flowing freely. "And I'll see you again soon." With a final squeeze of his hand, Willow turned away, positioning herself to crawl backward into the depression Jenkins had indicated. The young deputy nodded to Xavier, who raised his pistol. "Now." Jenkins called, and both men began firing rapidly toward the trees where Harker and his remaining men were hidden. Willow moved as quickly as she dared, keeping her body pressed to the muddy ground as she crawled away from the protective boulder. The depression in the earth provided minimal cover, but enough to hide her movement from direct view of the attackers. When she'd crawled about 20 yards, she paused, gathering herself for the dash to Thunder. The black gelding still stood where his master had left him. ears pricked forward at the continuing gunfire but remarkably steady given the circumstances. Taking a deep breath, Willow rose to a crouch and then burst into a run, moving as fast as the slippery ground would allow. She heard shouts from the trees as she was spotted, followed by the crack of rifles turning in her direction. Thunder saw her coming, and to her amazement, moved toward her as if understanding her intent. Remembering Xavier's instructions, Willow grabbed the saddle horn as she reached the horse, using her momentum to swing awkwardly up onto his back. Bullets kicked up mud around them as Willow gathered the reins and urged Thunder into motion. The powerful horse responded instantly, leaping forward down the road away from town, away from Harker's position. The ruse worked better than she could have hoped. Harker and his men, seeing a rider escaping, concentrated their fire in her direction. Behind her, she heard Jenkins and Xavier return fire with renewed intensity. Willow rode hard for about a quarter-mile before veering off the road into a stand of trees, circling back toward the ambush site. If the plan had worked, Xavier and Jenkins should have been able to reach better cover. Now she needed to rendezvous with them. As she approached cautiously from a different angle, the sound of gunfire had diminished to occasional shots rather than the previous barrage. Moving Thunder carefully between the trees, Willow tried to get a better view of the situation. What she saw made her blood run cold. Xavier was engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Harker at the edge of the road, both men struggling for possession of a knife that glinted dully in the gray light. Jenkins was nowhere to be seen, though a body that wasn't there before lay crumpled nearby another of Harker's men. Willow hoped, not the deputy. Without thinking, Willow urged Thunder forward, breaking from the cover of the trees. Xavier and Harker were too engaged in their desperate struggle to notice her approach. As she drew nearer, she could see that Xavier's wounded arm was hampering him, giving Harker a dangerous advantage. Looking around frantically for a weapon, Willow spotted a fallen branch thick enough to serve her purpose. She slid from Thunder's back, snatched up the makeshift club, and approached the fighting men from behind Harker. Harker had managed to force Xavier to one knee, the knife inching closer to his throat, despite Xavier's two-handed grip on Harker's wrist. Neither man noticed Willow until she swung the branch with all her strength, catching Harker on the side of the head with a sickening crack. Harker collapsed instantly, the knife falling from his suddenly limp fingers. Xavier looked up in shock to find Willow standing over him, branch still raised, her face pale but determined. "Willow," he gasped, struggling to his feet. "You were supposed to ride for help." "I did help," she replied, dropping the branch and moving to support him as he swayed slightly. "Are you all right?" Xavier nodded, though the motion clearly caused him pain. "Jenkins is wounded but alive, behind those rocks." He indicated a pile of boulders where Willow could now see the deputy propped against a stone, holding a bloodied cloth to his thigh. "And the others?" she asked, looking around warily. "Dead or fled," Xavier said grimly. "Harker was the last." Willow looked down at the unconscious form of the man who had caused so much trouble. "Is he alive?" Xavier confirmed after a brief examination. "Though he'll have a headache to rival the worst hangover when he wakes." The sound of approaching horses interrupted any further conversation. Both tensed until they recognized Sheriff Morton leading a group of armed townsmen. "Quinn, Jenkins," Morton called, dismounting quickly. "Miss Barker, are you all hurt?" "Alive," Xavier called back. "But Jenkins needs medical attention, and we've got prisoners to transport." As the reinforcements swarmed around them, securing Harker and attending to Jenkins, Xavier turned to Willow, taking her face gently between his hands. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said softly. "Charging a knife fight with a tree branch." I couldn't lose you, Willow replied simply. Xavier drew her against his chest, holding her tightly despite his injured arm. I thought the same when I saw you riding away, he admitted. That's when I knew I had to end this once and for all. They stood together in the rain, oblivious to the activity around them, drawing strength from each other's presence, and the knowledge that they had survived together. Sheriff Morton approached after ensuring Jenkins was being properly tended to. Miss Barker, Deputy Jenkins says we owe our success to your quick thinking. That was a brave thing you did. Foolish, perhaps, Willow demurred, but necessary. Necessary bravery is the best kind, Morton said with a hint of a smile. He turned to Xavier. Harker will stand trial for attempted murder, along with arson for the boarding house fire. His surviving companion has already confirmed they set the blaze hoping to draw you into their trap. Xavier nodded grimly. And the others? Dead, Morton confirmed. Self-defense, clearly. There'll be no charges against you, Quinn. As they made their slow way back to town, Willow riding double with Xavier on Thunder, while Harker was transported unconscious in a wagon, she considered the day's events. She had lost nearly all her material possessions in the fire, been shot at, and struck a man with potentially lethal force. Yet strangely, she felt no regret or trauma, only a profound gratitude that Xavier was alive and beside her. Where will you stay tonight? Xavier asked as they neared town, the rain finally beginning to slacken. The boarding house is uninhabitable, Willow finished for him. Mrs. Coleman offered me a room when the fire first broke out. I expect the offer still stands. Xavier nodded, though something in his expression suggested he had more to say. They rode in silence for another minute before he spoke again. Willow, he began hesitantly, I meant what I said back there, when I thought we might not survive. I love you. I meant it too, she replied softly. I love you, Xavier Quinn. He took a deep breath. Then perhaps, that is, if you would consider, I know it's sudden, but life out here doesn't always allow for lengthy courtships. Willow smiled at his uncharacteristic hesitation. Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier? Yes, he said, the single word carrying absolute certainty despite his previous fumbling. I am. I want you to be my wife, Willow, to share my home, my life, whatever future we can build together. The simplicity and sincerity of his proposal touched her deeply. There was no flowery language, no grand gestures, just the honest offering of his heart. Yes, she replied, equally simple and certain. I will marry you, Xavier. He turned in the saddle to look at her, his gray eyes alight with a joy she'd never seen there before. Then, heedless of the pain it must have caused his wounded arm, he twisted further to kiss her, a proper kiss this time, full of promise and passion, and the future they would share. When they finally broke apart, Xavier smiled a full, unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. I should get shot at more often if this is the result. Don't you dare, Willow laughed, though the memory of how close she'd come to losing him sobered her quickly. Once is quite enough, thank you. They rode into Montrose together, the town coming into view through the clearing rain. Despite the damage to the boarding house and the drama of the day, Willow felt a sense of homecoming stronger than anything she'd experienced since leaving Boston. We're quite a sight, Xavier observed as townspeople began to emerge from buildings to witness their return. Covered in mud and blood, you riding like a cavalry officer rather than a proper lady. I suspect Montrose has seen worse, Willow replied lightly. And after today, I doubt there's anyone left who'll question whether I belong here or with you. Xavier's arm tightened around her waist. No, he agreed. I think that matter is settled beyond all doubt. The aftermath of the confrontation with Harker and his gang brought changes to Montrose and to Willow and Xavier's lives. Harker survived his injury but was convicted of multiple charges and sentenced to prison in Denver. His surviving accomplice received a lesser sentence in exchange for testifying against his former leader. Mrs. Thornton's boarding house was eventually repaired, but by then, Willow had no need of accommodations in town. 2 weeks after Harker's arrest, she and Xavier were married in a simple ceremony at the church, with the entire town turning out to witness the union of the schoolteacher and the rancher. Willow continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on a gentle mare Xavier bred specifically for her. The children of Montrose benefited from her continued dedication to their education, and gradually, more families moved to the area, attracted by the growing reputation of both the school and the town. Xavier's horse breeding operation flourished, his animals becoming known throughout Colorado for their intelligence, stamina, and even temperament. With Willow's encouragement, he also became more involved in town affairs, eventually serving on the town council, where his thoughtful approach to problems earned the respect of his fellow citizens. Their home grew along with their prosperity. Xavier added rooms to the original cabin, creating a spacious, comfortable house that combined frontier practicality with touches of Eastern refinement that reminded Willow of her Boston heritage. A year after their marriage, their family expanded with the birth of a son, whom they named James after Xavier's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined them, Elizabeth, named for Willow's mother. The children grew up surrounded by books and horses, developing a blend of intellectual curiosity and practical skills that served them well in the evolving frontier. The darkness in Xavier that had troubled him for so long never disappeared entirely, but with Willow's love and the joy of family life, it receded into the background, a part of him, but no longer the defining feature of his existence. The nightmares that had once plagued him became rare, and when they did occur, he no longer faced them alone. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier presented Willow with a gift that moved her to tears, a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of their children, nearly identical to one her mother had worn, and that had been lost in the boarding house fire. "How did you know?" she asked, touching the delicate piece reverently. "You mentioned it once, not long after we met," Xavier replied. "Said it was one of the things you missed most from Boston. You really do remember everything I tell you," Willow marveled. "Important things," Xavier corrected, helping her fasten the chain around her neck. "And everything about you is important to me." As the locket settled against her heart, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrifying encounter at the trading post, where 5 men had surrounded her, and Xavier had stepped between them, saying simply, "Move along," to the life they had built together, a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined when she first headed west. "Penny for your thoughts," Xavier said, noting her pensive expression. Willow smiled, reaching up to touch his face, which had softened over the years, though the strength remained in his jaw and the intelligence in his eyes. "I was thinking about fate," she said. "How a moment of danger brought us together, and how every challenge since has only strengthened what we have." "Fate had help," Xavier observed wryly. "From a stubborn woman who refused to be intimidated and a man who found something worth changing for." "Worth fighting for," Willow corrected gently. "That too," Xavier agreed, drawing her close. "Always that." Outside their window, the Colorado sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children's laughter drifted from the yard where they played under Ezra's watchful eye, now a trusted foreman rather than a hired hand. In the distance, horses grazed peacefully in meadows that had once seemed an impossible dream to a war-scarred veteran. And beside him, in his arms, was the woman who had helped make all of it possible, not by changing him, but by believing in the man he could be when he'd almost forgotten himself. "I love you, Willow Quinn," Xavier said softly against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, the words as true and certain as they had been on that rain-soaked road 5 years earlier. Today, tomorrow, always. In the years that followed, as Montrose grew from frontier outpost to thriving community, as their children grew and eventually left to pursue their own dreams, as age gradually silvered their hair and slowed their steps, that love remained constant, a foundation as solid as the mountains that had witnessed its beginning, and continued to stand guard over its endurance in all seasons and through all changes unto the end of their days.